Dean Martin's final words before he died on Christmas Day 1995 weren't about fame or fortune. What he told his family will change how you see everything. It was 3:17 a.m. on December 25, 1995, Christmas morning, when the monitors in room 421 at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center began showing the irregular patterns that medical staff recognized as the final stages of respiratory failure. Dean Martin, the king of cool, who had entertained millions around the world for over 4 decades, was dying. But Dean Martin wasn't thinking about his career, his fame, or his fortune as he lay in that hospital bed. In his final hours, surrounded by his children, Dean was focused on something far more important, the words he wanted to leave with the people he loved most. Dean had been admitted to Cedars-Sinai 3 days earlier with severe pneumonia that his 78-year-old body was too weak to fight. The past 3 years had been the darkest of his life, marked by the devastating loss of his son Dean Paul Martin Jr., who had died in a military plane crash in 1987. That tragedy had broken something fundamental inside Dean, and he had never fully recovered from the grief. Those who knew Dean well understood that he had essentially been dying of a broken heart since losing his son. Dean Paul, an Air National Guard pilot and former tennis professional, had been Dean's pride and joy. When Dean Paul's F-4 Phantom jet crashed into the San Bernardino Mountains during a routine training flight, Dean lost not just his son but his will to live. In the 8 years following Dean Paul's death, Dean had gradually withdrawn from public life. He had stopped performing regularly, rarely made public appearances, and spent most of his time alone in his Beverly Hills home, surrounded by photographs and memories of better times. His family watched helplessly as the man who had once been the epitome of cool and confidence became increasingly isolated and melancholy. By December 1995, Dean's health had been declining rapidly. The pneumonia that brought him to the hospital was complicated by kidney problems and a weakened heart. His doctors had been honest with his family. Dean Martin was dying, and there was nothing more they could do except keep him comfortable in his final days. Dean's daughter, Gail Martin, who had been his closest confidant in his later years, had maintained a constant vigil at his bedside. She was joined by his other children, Claudia, Craig, and Gina, along with some of his grandchildren. They all understood that these were likely their father's final hours, and they wanted to be with him when the end came. Throughout December 23rd and 24th, Dean had drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing his family members and sometimes seeming lost in memories of the past. The medication for his pain made it difficult for him to speak clearly, but when he was lucid, he would squeeze his children's hands and try to communicate with them. It was Gail who first noticed that Dean seemed to be gathering his strength for something important. Around midnight on Christmas Eve, Dean's breathing became more labored, but he also became more alert than he had been in days. He looked around the room at his children with clear, focused eyes, as if he had something crucial to tell them. "Dad," Gail whispered, leaning close to his bed, "we're all here. We love you so much." Dean nodded slowly and managed to speak in a voice that was weak, but surprisingly clear. "I need to tell you something. All of you." His children moved closer to his bed, holding his hands and listening intently. They could see that Dean was using every bit of his remaining strength to share what was on his heart. "I've been thinking," Dean continued, pausing to catch his breath between words, "about what really matters, about what I should have paid more attention to." Claudia, his eldest daughter, gently stroked his forehead. "What do you want to tell us, Dad?" Dean looked at each of his children's faces, as if he were memorizing them. Then he spoke the words that would echo in their hearts for the rest of their lives. "I spent too many years thinking that success meant making other people happy, making audiences laugh, making producers money, making critics impressed. But I learned something after losing Dean Paul. The only success that matters is making the people you love feel loved." He paused, gathering strength, and continued, "I was a good entertainer, but I wasn't always a good father. I was there for your shows and your games and your graduations, but I wasn't always there for your hearts. I was so busy being Dean Martin that I sometimes forgot to just be your dad." The room was completely silent, except for the quiet hum of medical equipment. Dean's children were crying, but they were hanging on every word their father was sharing. "Your mother," Dean said, referring to his ex-wife Jeanne, who had raised most of his children, "she understood what I'm telling you now. She knew that love isn't something you perform. It's something you live every single day." Dean's voice was getting weaker, but his message was becoming stronger. "I want you to know that every day of your lives, you've been my greatest accomplishment. Not the records, not the movies, not the shows. You, each one of you." Craig, his youngest son, leaned closer. "Dad, you were a wonderful father. You gave us everything." Dean shook his head slightly. "I gave you things. I gave you opportunities. But what I should have given you more of was my time, my attention, my presence when you needed it." Then Dean said something that surprised everyone in the room. "After Dean Paul died, I realized that I had been living my whole life backwards. I thought that if I was successful enough, famous enough, respected enough, then the people I loved would automatically know how much they meant to me. But that's not how love works." Gail was crying openly now. "Dad, we always knew you loved us." "Maybe," Dean replied. "But I should have told you more. I should have shown you more. I should have worried less about being cool and more about being close." Dean's breathing was becoming more difficult, but he wasn't finished. "I want to tell you the 3 most important things I've learned. The things that actually matter." His children leaned in closer, understanding that they were receiving their father's final wisdom. "First," Dean said, "love isn't something you earn. You don't have to be perfect to deserve love. You don't have to accomplish anything to be worthy of love. You are loved simply because you exist, because you're mine." He paused, looking directly at each of his children. "I know I sometimes made you feel like you had to earn my approval, like you had to succeed to make me proud. That was my mistake, not yours. You were born worthy of all the love I had to give." "Second," Dean continued, his voice barely above a whisper now, "being present is the greatest gift you can give someone. Not presents, not money, not opportunities. Presence. When someone you love is talking to you, put down everything else and listen. When they're hurting, sit with them. When they're celebrating, celebrate with them. Time is the only thing you can't get back, so give it generously to the people who matter." Gina was holding her father's hand tightly, feeling the weight of his words. "And third," Dean said, "forgiveness is the key to peace. Forgive others for their mistakes. Forgive yourself for your failures, and ask for forgiveness when you've caused pain. I've spent too many years carrying grudges and regrets that only made me heavy." Dean looked specifically at Craig when he said this. There had been some difficult years between them when Craig was struggling with substance abuse, and Dean had sometimes been harsh in his attempts to help. "I forgive you for every mistake you think you've made, and I ask you to forgive me for every time I wasn't the father you needed." Then Dean said something that none of his children had ever heard him say before. "I'm proud of each of you, not for what you've accomplished, but for who you are. You're kind, you're compassionate, you're strong, you're better people than I ever was." The monitors showed that Dean's heart rate was becoming increasingly irregular, and his breathing was more labored, but he had one more thing to share. "There's something else," he said, his voice now barely audible. "Dean Paul came to me in a dream last week. He told me that where he is, there's no pain, no regret, no sadness. He told me he's waiting for me, and that when I see him again, all the hurt will be gone." Dean smiled slightly, the first real smile his family had seen from him in years. "He told me to tell you that love doesn't end when life ends, that the love we have for each other is the one thing that lasts forever." As dawn broke on Christmas morning, Dean's breathing became shallower. His children surrounded his bed, holding his hands and telling him how much they loved him. At 3:17 a.m., as the first light of Christmas Day filtered through the hospital room windows, Dean Martin spoke his final words. "Thank you for loving me, even when I didn't know how to love myself. Take care of each other." He squeezed Gail's hand one last time and closed his eyes peacefully. Dean Martin died as he had lived in his final years, surrounded by love, but this time he was fully present for it. In the days following Dean's death, his family found themselves returning again and again to his final words. His message about love, presence, and forgiveness became a guiding philosophy for how they approached their own relationships and their own lives. Gail later said that her father's deathbed conversation had been both the saddest and most beautiful moment of her life. He spent his whole career entertaining people, she reflected, but his final performance was just being our dad, sharing his heart with us in the most honest way he ever had. The funeral for Dean Martin was attended by hundreds of celebrities, fans and friends who came to pay their respects to the King of Cool. But for his children, the most meaningful tribute to their father wasn't the public ceremony or the media coverage. It was the private promise they made to each other to live by the wisdom he had shared in his final hours. Craig Martin, who had struggled with addiction for years, found new motivation for his recovery in his father's words about forgiveness and presence. "Dad told me that love isn't something you earn," Craig said later. "That gave me permission to forgive myself and start over." Claudia began spending more time with her own children, remembering her father's advice about presence being the greatest gift. "I realized I had been making the same mistakes Dad made," she said. "I was so busy providing for my kids that I wasn't always there for them emotionally." Gina started a foundation in her father's memory, focused on helping families communicate better and spend quality time together. "Dad's last words weren't about music or entertainment," she explained. "They were about the things that actually matter: love, presence, and forgiveness." The wisdom that Dean Martin shared in his final hours became his greatest legacy. Not the songs, not the movies, not the fame, but the understanding that success in life isn't measured by applause or accolades, but by the love we give and receive from the people who matter most. 28 years later, Dean's children and grandchildren still gather every Christmas morning to remember not just his death, but his final gift to them, the reminder that love is the only thing that truly lasts, and that being present for the people you care about is the most important performance you'll ever give. His final words serve as a reminder to all of us that fame, fortune, and public recognition are temporary, but the love we share with our families is eternal. Sometimes the most profound wisdom comes not from a lifetime of success, but from the courage to be completely honest about what we've learned and what we wish we had done differently. Dean Martin's last words weren't about being the king of cool. They were about being a father, a human being, and a man who had finally understood what really matters in life. If this story of final wisdom and family love moved you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories about life's most important lessons. Have you ever had a conversation that changed how you see everything? Share your experience in the comments below. And remember to ring that notification bell for more amazing stories about the moments that matter most.